we have. And I have another friend who I said that to, and she was horrified. What do you mean, God is God, and God is love, and what are you talking about? But the truth is, we settle for a partial God. We are endlessly creating God in our own image. So if we're tiny and mean and judgmental, we end up discovering that God hates the same people we do. We create God in our own image. So we settle for a partial God when what we need to do is endlessly nudge our image of God to something larger and more spacious. And that's what we hope to do. I met a woman recently who was a volunteer at Juvenile Hall, and she said, my job there is just to get these guys right with God. And I said, wow, I didn't know they were wrong with God. But that's how we think. We think that it's about measuring up. It's about how do we keep God from being disappointed in us. And that's the kind of image, and we need to endlessly find a better God than one we have. One of my favorite poets is a Persian poet named Hafez, and he has this image, and he said, God and I have become two giant fat guys in a tiny boat. We keep bumping into each other and laughing. I love that, and not because they're fat, I think that's the idea where we nudge ourselves to something larger. And if you go to the prophet Isaiah, he tells us that God has a nickname for you, and we brace ourselves for what it's going to be. And here's the name that God has for each one of you. My delight. We don't really believe that. We think God's nickname is my disappointment. Why is that? How do we get to this place where we can nudge ourselves every day to something larger? A sense of God who's more spacious. There was a homie who worked here years ago named Andrew who took his 3 tiny little kids to the public library downtown. It's a beautiful place if you've never been there. And he goes to the kiddie floor and pulls out, a handful of books. But then he goes to another floor where the chairs are bigger and plusher and it's quieter. So he puts his kids in these big ass chairs and he sits there and he reads to them out loud. But all the while he sees the librarian who's kind of a guy who's behind this counter, and he feels self-conscious. The guy's looking at me and, oh God, he's going to tell me to get out. He's going to throw me out any minute. I know I'm probably not supposed to be here. And he does that whole thing on himself. And when he finishes, he gathers up his kids and he starts to walk out, and the librarian signals to him, come here. And he goes, here it comes. He's going to tell me something, is what he said. And when Andrew gets up to him, he smiles and he says, good job. And that's how we are. We kind of think God is going to tell us something. You've let me down. You haven't measured up. And when all God really wants to say is, good job. We need a better God than the one we have. And I think every single day our task is to not settle for a partial one, to nudge ourselves into something larger, more spacious, like 2 fat guys in a tiny boat. Let yourselves bump into God today and laugh.